قل هذه سبيلي أدعو إلى الله على بصيرة أنا ومن اتبعني وسبحان الله وما أنا من المشركين.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستهديه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. أما بعد. This is our 26th class on elucidations or explanation of al-usul al-thalatha, and we're still in the core part of the book, the center part of the book, the main chapter, the chapter which is meant to be the real book, the essential part of the book. And we're still on the introduction of that chapter. So what we're taking so far of chapter 3 is only an introduction to the main part of this chapter. If you don't have tashkil on your copies, on your books, you should write them down, or we can sit after or before class and go over them, because some of you have been making mistakes in tashkil when they recite it. اعلم أرشدك الله لطاعته أن الحنيفية ملة إبراهيم أن تعبد الله وحده مخلصا له الدين وبذلك أمر الله جميع الناس وخلقهم لها كما قال تعالى وما خلقت الجن والإنس إلا ليعبدون. When you write, especially at the end of the words, that's where many of you were making mistakes. ومعنى يعبدوني يوحدوني، وأعظم ما أمر الله به التوحيد، وهو إفراد الله بالعبادة، وأعظم ما نهى عنه الشرك، وهو دعوة غيره معه، والدليل قوله تعالى واعبدوا الله ولا تشركوا به شيئا. We stopped at the statement وَبِذَلِكَ أَمَرَ اللَّهُ جَمِيعَ النَّاسِ. This is what Allah commanded all people with. What did He command all people with? To worship Allah alone sincerely. The previous sentence that we took, that's what He meant. All that we spoke about in the previous two classes, I believe, when we started chapter 3, following Millat Ibrahim and following it sincerely, that's what He means Allah commanded us to do. And that's why we gave last week a practical example on following Millat Ibrahim sincerely and ikhlas, a practical example of what we see and what appears to us, and Allah knows what's in the hearts of a present day situation. The author said Allah commanded all people. Commanded here is what's wajib, because the word commanded, amara, comes to mean a wajib. It can come as well to mean a mustahab, which is liked or preferred. That which is liked or preferred to do can come as a amar. Here, in this sentence, what he means, it's the wajib type. And we'll talk about that inshallah in usul, how it can be when it's wajib and when it's not. Here it's not only wajib, but the highest level of wajib, because this is the principal root foundation of the deen and belief. The foundation that everything is founded on. Then he said, Allah commanded all people. And he used the word an-nas. He said an-nas, which means human beings. Muslim and kafir. An-nas includes all human beings, Muslim and kafir. Now here, when he used the nas, Allah commanded all people, and he said an-nas, had the author used, rahmatullah alayh, khalq instead of nas, meaning creation, that would have been more precise. And many ulama commented on that who taught me, rahmatullah alayhim. Why? Because nas means humans, which is right. Allah commanded people. But there's more than nas that were commanded with tawheed. There's the jinn. The jinn are not included in the Arabic word nas. Khalq would mean creation, and that would include the jinn and the ins. The jinn and the humans. Jinn are obligated to follow the tawheed sincerely like us. So would have been probably more accurate to use the term khalq instead of nas, because nas only includes human being. Khalq means human being and jinn, and Allah commanded the jinn and the human to follow the tawheed. Then the author says, وَخَلَقَهُمْ لَهَا. And it was for that, or for this, that he created them for. He created them for what? Again, for what we've been talking about for the past 2 classes since we began this chapter, to follow Millat Ibrahim, which means follow the pure Tawheed with sincerity. I just said right now, had he used the word khalq instead of nas, it would have been more accurate and precise. There's another issue here. Pay attention what he said. This is what Allah, focus, this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded all people with, and this is what he created them for. Now, had he switched the statements around, it would have been better. Why? Why would have been better? To say he created them for it and he commanded them with it. He created them for it and he commanded them with it. Why would it have been better had he switched it around? Because which comes first? Were we created first or were we commanded first? He created, then he commanded. So some of the ulama said it would have been better that he mentioned them in order. Then he mentioned the proof for this, as he always does at the end of the sentences. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I did not create jinn and mankind except that they should worship me. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ وَبِذَلِكَ أَمَرَ اللَّهُ جَمِيعَ النَّاسِ وَخَلَقَهُمْ لَهَا كَمَا قَالَ تَعَالَى وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. Let's pause with this verse now. وَمَا. وَمَا means I did not. وَمَا means I did not. خَلَقْت means I create. I did not create. خَلَقْت, create. I did not create. Jinn, you know the jinn. The jinn is a matter of al-ghayb, unseen. Jinn is an entity that is invisible. We don't see it. Sometimes we may see it, but that's exceptional. Its original creation is that it's unseen. We don't see it. We know of it, that which Allah told us. They were created from fire. The jinn were called jinn lijtinanihim. Al-ijtinan huwa al-istitar. They were called jinn because of the root word of jinn, which means hidden. And they are a hidden creation. The word al-junnah is derivative from the same word of jinn. And it's a name for niqab. Why is it named for niqab? Because it's a covering for a woman like niqab, where it keeps her hidden. And that's why it was called that, because her face remains hidden, from the same root word. نعم صالح أنت تعلم الأسئلة بعد الدرس جزاك الله خير لكن سأجيبك. الجنة، قلت الجنة. الجنة هي الكلمة الأخرى للنقاب. الجنة غطاء لرأس المرأة ووجهها ما عدا العينين. Al-Junnah is a cover for a woman where she shows only her eyes, what keeps her hidden. Also, al-jinan, from the same root word, al-jinan, which is the heart. It comes from the same root word. Why is the heart called? Jinan? Because it's hidden in the rib cage. Someone will say, well, we can see the heart with the operation. Yeah, you can, of course, with the operation, but the origin of it is that it's not seen. And it's exceptional to see it. Just like the jinn. Their origin is that they're hidden from us, even though in exceptional situations, one may be able to see them. More than that, even from the same root word is Jannah. May Allah grant us, all of us, Jannah. Among the reasons it was called Jannah is because its delights are hidden from us. That's one of the reasons it was called Jannah. فَلَا تَعْلَمُ نَفْسٌ مَا أُخْفِيَ لَهُم مِّن قُرَّةِ أَعْيُنٍ جَزَاءً بِمَا كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ. In Surah Al-Sajdah, no one knows what's hidden for them of delight as a reward. أَخْفَى الْجَزَاء لِأَنَّهُمْ أَخْفُوا الْعَمَلِ. Allah hid the reward because they hid the deeds. So Allah kept something hidden for you, and that's Jannah, or in Jannah. Jinn is part of believing in ghaib, and anyone who denies them is kafir, because they are in the Quran, and they're in the Sunnah, and they're in Ijma'. After he mentioned jinn, he mentioned ins. And ins, like we said, is human. Allah said, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسِ. And they were called ins from amiability, because people like and need amiability among each other. It's essential to human beings, and they strive for it. So that is where the root word of ins, or humans, comes from in Arabic. Illa. Illa means except that they should. Illa. لِيَعْبُدُونَ. لِيَعْبُدُونَ إِلَّا لِي. إِلَّا لِي is a tool to limit and restrict. حصر وقصر in Arabic. It's among, the way it's worded here, highest levels and forms of limited and restricting something. Here, all matters and wisdoms behind the creation of human being and jinn were denied, except for worship. It's limited to and restricted to worship. The hasr and qasr, it's called hasr and qasr in Arabic, limiting and restricting to a certain matter. And in this verse, illa li is among the highest ways to do that. Next, then he commented on the verse saying, وَمَعْنَا يَعْبُدُونَ يُوَحِّدُونَ وَمَعْنَا يَعْبُدُونَ يُوَحِّدُونَ وَمَعْنَا يَعْبُدُونِ يُوَحِّدُونِ. And the meaning of worship of ibadah here, he said, the meaning of ibadah is to single Allah in worship, in tawheed. And the meaning of ibadah is to single Allah in tawheed. When he said the meaning of worship of ya'budun is yuwahidun, which is to single Allah in worship in tawheed, he means that tawheed is from the meanings of ibadah. Tawheed is from the meanings that he's trying to define ibadah. Tawheed is among the meanings. He defined tawheed, he defined ibadah, but that's not a definition. He means that tawheed is from or among the meanings of ibadah. Among the meanings of ibadah, not the full definition. You should know that ibadah, worship, is broader than just tawheed. So ya'budun, yuwahidun, he didn't just mean it's only tawheed. Ibadah is tawheed, but not only tawheed. It includes other aspects. It includes salah, siyam, hajj, and other matters that fall under ibadah, not just tawheed. In Arabic, it's common and known to define a term with a portion of what it means. And this is what he did here. In Arabic, it's called تفسير الشيء ببعض أفراده. تفسير الشيء ببعض أفراده. Here, Imam Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab, rahimahullah, that's exactly what he did. He defined ibadah, which is worship, in a portion of its definition, which is tawheed. He can do that, but you have to know, and we have to know, that's not all of the definition, because ibadah, like I said, is broader than that. The author may have chosen this definition possibly because it was narrated by Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, who said everywhere in the Quran that you see a'buduni, a'budullah, it means wahidullah. A'budullah means wahidullah. At-Tabari also narrated that Ibn Abbas interpreted the verse in Surah Al-Fatiha, إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ. He said, إِيَّاكَ نُوَحِّدُ وَنَخَافُ وَنَرْجُو. So it's possibly because of that. Or another interpretation, more widely accepted here for يَعْبُدُونَ, and this is the more widely accepted interpretation for ibadah, is to show humbleness and humility, dhul, in obedience, and the head matter of that obedience is tawheed. To show humbleness and humility in refraining from prohibitions, and the head matter to refrain from is shirk. This is more general, more broader definition than the earlier one, and it's more encompassing and better. And this is supported by a statement from Ali radiallahu an, and it's the definition also chosen by Ibn Taymiyyah. The second one is the one chosen by Ibn Taymiyyah, and it's a statement by Ali ibn Abi Talib. The author wanted to show by choosing his definition of Tawheed for ibadah that if your worship is not founded on Tawheed, it's not really ibadah. Tawheed is an essential part of ibadah. It's a pillar of it. It's a pillar. You can't stand without it. So the author chose to define ibadah with an essential pillar of ibadah, which is Tawheed, but not all of ibadah. And that's the point. Now, what Tawheed is he referring to here? The author, what Tawheed is he? We took three types of Tawheed before: Rububiyyah, Uluhiyyah, Asma wa Sifat. We took these, we studied them. Which Tawheed is he referring to in this statement? He's referring to Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah. He didn't mean all three branches of Tawheed. He was specifically referring to Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah. How do we know that he meant this branch, that it's the Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah branch? Because he said ibadah, singling out Allah in ibadah. That's exact definition of uluhiyyah. That's the definition of Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah. Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah is also called Tawheed al-Ibadah. That's another name for it. They're just two different names. You can use any one of them interchangeably. You can use Tawheed al-Ibadah and Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah, and both mean the same. Why there's two names? If you look at it in pertaining to Allah being worshipped alone, from the angle of Allah being worshipped alone, it's uluhiyyah. It comes from ilah. If you look at it from the angle, the acts solely of the human being who's doing the act, or the jinn, being solely for the sake of Allah, then it's ibadah, it's worship. It's Tawheed al-Ibadah. So both terms work for Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah. This Tawheed requires to face Allah in your worship directly, and to be your act to be solely for the sake of Allah, nothing small or big to be other than to Allah. And then to know that the ibadah is proper, to learn that the ibadah is proper. That's part of Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah. The Tawheed the author is referring to here is the Tawheed of worship. It's got to be sincere and in accordance. This was the Tawheed that the mushriks went astray because of during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. Most of the striving of the messengers ﷺ with their people was because of this category of Tawheed. وَلَقَدْ بَعَثْنَا فِي كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولًا أَنِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَاجْتَنِبُوا الطَّاغُوتَ. We sent a messenger to every nation ordering that they should worship Allah alone. وَلَقَدْ بَعَثْنَا فِي كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولًا أَنِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَاجْتَنِبُوا الطَّاغُوتَ in Surah Al-Nahl. Worship is not correct except for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whoever violates this tawheed is a mushrik, even if he affirms the other two tawheeds. Even if he believes in Tawheed al-Rububiyyah and Tawheed al-Asma' al-Sifat. إِنَّهُ مَنْ يُشْرِكْ بِاللَّهِ فَقَدْ حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ الْجَنَّةِ. Whoever associates anything in worship with Allah, then Allah forbid paradise on him. And his abode will be to fire. And his abode will be to fire. Keep in mind the type of worship in the verse encompasses all of worship. إلا ليعبدون وما خلقت الجن والإنس إلا ليعبدون. It's all worship. But it mainly means the worship that's the test from Allah on this earth. That's the real core meaning of it. The worship that's a test that determines who accepts the truth and who rejects the truth. Who ends up being a winner in the life after, who ends up being a failure in the akhirah. The type of worship here is the same that Allah mentioned in many other verses. The worship meant is the worship of Allah alone. The worship or test that has been commanded on people. The main worship, the tawheed of Allah, which is mentioned in other verses. Ya ayyuhan nasu u'budu rabbakum. U'budu rabbakum. The main tawheed. ولقد بعثنا في كل أمة رسولا أن اعبدوا الله واجتنبوا الطاغوت ذلكم الله ربكم لا إله إلا هو خالق كل شيء فاعبدوه واسأل من أرسلنا قبلك من رسلنا أجعلنا لهم من دون الرحمن آلهة يعبدون. In this verse and in the verses that I mentioned is the verses that have the worship that's a test from Allah that determines who goes to heaven and who goes to hell. الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم. The test, the one that Allah created us for. إنا خلقنا الإنسان من نطفة أمشاج نبتليه. The test. That's what we were created for. إنا جعلنا ما على الأرض زينة لها لنبلوهم. The test. All these verses say test. وهو الذي خلق السماوات والأرض في 6 أيام وكان عرشه على الماء ليبلوكم. So the ibadah here is the test that we were created for. The test that will determine who goes to heaven and to hell. Ali ibn Abi Talib and Ikrimah said, ibadah here means that they worship me alone. That's it. That's the test we were created for. Al-Rabi' ibn Anas and Ibn Atiyah attributed this tafsir that I just mentioned, that it being the main test, to Ibn Abbas as well. Another opinion is some said, Ya'budun here means that they are forced into submission. This is a different meaning. They're forced into submission and humility to Allah, willingly or unwillingly. That's a true fact, but not the most accurate tafsir of this particular ayah. Why? Because the verse specifies jinn and ins. Had it been the forced type of ibadah where we're forced to submit to Allah in a way, that would have included other than the human and jinn. Because everything submits to Allah, not just the human and the jinn. Everything submits in humility to Allah. It would by force. It would have included animals and mountains and trees and rocks. That, not having that in the verse, shows that this ibadah here is the test from Allah to worship Him. The test that we are tested with in this life, the test of our life that that shows who wins and who loses. The verse also says, لِيَعْبُدُونَ. لِيَعْبُدُونَ. Meaning that there is an act we have to do, which is to worship Him. Had the ibadah that's in this verse been the one that's a forced submission to Allah, then there would be no act needed on the behalf of human beings, Allah or jinn. Allah forced them into submission. So no act is required on behalf of creation. Yet the verse specifies لِيَعْبُدُونَ, that there's an act that's requested of people. So that means the worship in this verse, the يَعْبُدُونَ over here, we have to do something. In forced submission to Allah, we don't need to do anything because it's forced. So here it says لِيَعْبُدُونَ, there's something we have to do. It shows that it's the ibadah that's a test from Allah in this life. The verse comes in a chain of verses also to vilify those who worship other than Allah. Had the verse meant the forced submission to Allah, as some stated, there would be no need to vilify or warn, which is contrary to the chain of verses that we have here. He vilified and warned those who don't follow the righteous way. The forced submission doesn't need that. Next, let's move on. An important point. Allah said He created us for His worship. He commanded us to worship Him. Now, why isn't everyone worshiping Him then? This applies to dozens or hundreds of verses in the Quran and the Hadith. For example, in this verse, Allah said He created us. We got that part. He created us. But then He said to worship Him. He created us. We know that order is we're here. That means He created us. But why isn't everyone worshiping? That's the problem. He ordered we be created. We are. He ordered we worship Him. Not everyone's worshiping Him. Here you need to understand. There's something called إرادة شرعية تكليف فقط. إرادة شرعية التكليف فقط. What do we mean? In order to understand the verse and similar verses, you have to understand there's two forms of wills for Allah. Two forms of mashia. Will is mashia. Two forms of mashia of Allah. There's number one, إرادة كونية. And number two, إرادة شرعية. Number one, إرادة كونية. In English, I believe the good interpretation of the word كونية would probably be universal will. Now this will, it's mashia. It's the will of Allah in which His order is carried out. That's A. B. This is the type of will of Allah that we say whatever will Allah wills happens and whatever He does not will not happen. C. This is a will like death, a mashia like death, like health, like sickness. Everyone's equal in these. Muslim, kafir, righteous, not righteous. They're kawniyya, they're universal will. Example, what happened to Ayub? أني مسني الضر وأنت أرحم الراحمين. Surah Al-Anbiya, he said, he cried to his Lord, verily distress has seized me. It seizes the messengers and it seizes other people. Alayhi salam, Ayub alayhi salam, it seized him and it seizes other people. Hardship afflicted his messenger. إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون. This is another example of this. General order of Allah, be and it's done, falls under this will, the first one. وَكَانَ أَمْرُ اللَّهِ مَفْعُولًا. And this summarizes this will. This is another example. The commandment of Allah is always executed. This will is a general will that encompasses everything in the universe, good and bad. Encompasses everything in the universe, good and bad. The general universal will. His order is carried out in this, but it will not necessarily mean that He likes it. It is not necessary that all actions of His creations are liked by Him. Rather, you know, many of their acts are disliked by Allah. But He willed for them to pass. There are acts that are disliked by Allah, but Allah willed for them to pass. This is irada kawniyya or universal will. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the shaitan. I was given a lecture once and they asked someone before me who spoke. They asked, did Allah create the shaitan? And he didn't know this stuff, so he said, no. Allah created the shaitan, He disliked him. He created the kafirin and He disliked them. Inna Allah la yuhibbul kafirin. In Surah Al-Zumar. He created, فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُحِبُّ الْكَافِرِينَ. In Surah Al-Zumar. He created the kuffar. He's not pleased with kufr. وَلَا يَرْضَى لِعِبَادِ الْكُفْرِ. Not everything Allah permits to exist or He creates means that He loves. Repeat. So you get it right. This will is the universal will, al-kawniyya. It's that not everything Allah permits to exist and He creates necessarily means that He loves it. Under this will, Allah may decree to pass things which He does not command His slaves to follow, like kufr, disobedience. Orders carried out in this will, this type of will by Allah, doesn't necessarily mean He likes it. Then we have the second one. Al-irada al-shar'iyya. And I believe possibly the most accurate term for that would possibly be judicial will. The will of A, the will of Allah, which is in accordance to Allah's legislation. B, it is related to what Allah likes. C, this will may take place, may not. This Mashiach of Allah may take place, may not. Look at the verse. وَإِذَا فَعَلُوا فَاحِشَةً قَالُوا وَجَدْنَا عَلَيْهَا آبَاءَنَا وَاللَّهُ أَمَرَنَا بِهَا قُلْ إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يَأْمُرُ بِالْفَحْشَاءِ. When they commit a fahisha, they said, we found our fathers doing it. Allah did not command fahisha or sins. It's under the universal Mashiach. Under the Shari'ah Mashiach, He wants you to follow the straight path. يريد الله ليبين لكم ويهديكم سنن الذين من قبلكم ويتوب عليكم والله عليم حكيم. Allah wants to guide you. This is an example of this one. Allah wants to guide you, to forgive you. That's Shari'ah. This is the will that's Shari'ah. He wills this will, He likes it, but not everyone does it. وَأَحْسِنُوا إِنَّ اللَّهَ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. He commands us to be righteous. He wants everyone to be righteous, but not everyone does this will of Allah. Some respond to this will of Allah that He ordered and commanded, others don't. You understand? For example, the acts of obedience of a believer, they're loved by Allah. Your ibadah, your prayer at night, your fard, your sunnah, your deeds. And they're passed under His universal will, kawniyah, and they are passed by His judicial will. Both of them apply. So in the case of an obedient believer, inshallah, in our case, inshallah, our tawheed, our iman, both wills apply. The shar'iyyah and the kawniyah. Allah passed it as a universal will, and we accepted that. That would be the judicial will when we accepted it. Both wills apply to the obedience of a righteous believer. A non-believer, Allah likes for him to believe. That's what? Shar'iyyah, yes, judicial will. But it doesn't necessarily have to happen. And it doesn't happen because he's a kafir. Had it been universal will, it's going to happen. Most definitely, it's going to happen. Like creating us. Judicial will doesn't necessarily have to happen. Understood? Basically, under al-irada al-shar'iyya, the judicial will, it's not necessary that His commands will be executed, carried out, or followed. And those are the ones that are like to Allah. Those are the wills that are like to Allah from us. Here in the verse, لِيَعْبُدُونَ وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. Allah orders to do ibadah to Him, meaning to be Muslim, to win the test in this life. Now take it as a rule. All orders to do ibadah in the Quran are shar'iyyah, are the will that's shar'iyyah. The second type of will of Allah that He likes and that He commands people to do. Also, ibadah shar'iyyah means it's not the type of will that's necessarily going to be executed. That's why you don't see everybody worshiping Allah or on the tawheed. Allah likes it. He wants people to do it, but it's not necessarily going to be executed. I believe now the faces, I see that I understand. So in a nutshell, there's two differences between the two wills. I'll give it to you in a nutshell. The first will, the general, universal will. The second one, Shari'ah, is a specific will. The first universal, kawniyah, is that Allah creates everything and orders everything, and it's all carried out by His will, because nothing gets in the way of Allah. What He wills happens. He orders that which He likes and that which He does not, and it's always executed. The will, that Shari'ah, the judicial will, it's what He likes, but does not mean it will be necessarily executed by people. General matters of this universe fall under the kawniyah, the universal will. A servant's obedience, that's both, like we said, kawniyah and shar'iyyah. One who's not obedient, rather a fasiq, who does not do his duties or ordains or is a disbeliever, that's kawniyah. Allah, under Allah's will, it happened. He could have stopped it, but Allah allowed it to happen. That's under the universal. Then if you understand this, when you understand this, you understand Allah. This is like a response to also those who object to Allah and say, why are the problems in the world going on? the Syrians are being killed, or the Palestinians, or we go through hard times like that. A lot of the atheists say, why does Allah see and let this happen and not change it? Because there's two wills of Allah, al-kawniyya and al-shar'iyya. And He has sunan on this earth. He has sunan on this earth. Some of them He likes and some of them He does not. And have and understand that, it puts you at peace. But let's go on further to a more narrow explanation of this. Very similar, but a little bit more narrow. In ibadah itself, in ibadah, there's a shar'iyya and kawniyya in ibadah. Ibadah kawniyya is submission to Allah. Submission to Allah by force. What He commanded and decreed in creation, and this is the submission that's common over all creation. No one can escape it. Humans, jinn, rocks, trees, sun, moon, all those submit to Allah by force. No one can anyone run away from Allah? Ma'adallah? No one can run away. So everything submits to Allah by force. This is the first one. Allah said, "In kullu man fis samawati wal ardi illa at ar-rahmani abda." All in the heavens and in the earth will come to Allah on the day of judgment as submissive slaves. In Surah Al-Maryam, "In kullu man fis samawati wal ardi illa at ar-rahmani abda." This type of servitude covers the believers and non-believers, the humans, non-humans, the righteous and wicked. Everything is forced to submit to Allah. The first type of servitude is not something for which a servant is commanded. There's nothing you're commanded in this. You're not commanded to do this, because this is by force. Nor do you get reward for it in itself. You don't get reward for it in itself because you didn't do nothing. This is by force. The first type of servitude is not something for which a servant is commanded because there's no action. For example, hardships are by force. You didn't do nothing, you got hardship. You must submit to them by force. You don't get reward for them because you didn't do nothing. Muslim gets it, a non-Muslim gets it, animals get it. They're imposed from Allah on you by force. However, if the hardship comes and you're patient and you thank Allah, then that's totally different. Your time of ease, that's from by force. You don't get reward for that in itself. That was given, that was imposed by force on you. If you thank Allah, then that's the next category. Then you get reward for the thanking, but not the ease or the hardship in itself. Now the second one is worship or servitude, ibadah shar'iyya, judicial ibadah. This is the second one. And this is to obey and submit to the laws of Allah. To submit to the laws of Allah. To submit to the commands of Allah. This is particular to those who are obedient to Allah. And those who comply with that which Allah's messengers ﷺ came with. وَعِبَادُ الرَّحْمَنِ الَّذِينَ يَمْشُونَ عَلَى الْأَرْضِ هَوْنًا. The believing slaves of Allah who come on this earth and walk in calmness and humility and humbleness. So the previous ibadah of kawniyya, one is not rewarded because it's imposed by force. It's forced. You're forced to submit to Allah in some matters. You did not do nothing to earn it. The second type of ibadah, of servitude, the person is commanded and he will be rewarded and he will be punished, depending on if he does it or he doesn't do it. Why you need to know this ibadah and irada kawniyya and this ibadah and irada shar'iyya? Why do you need to know this? Allah in the verse, He created us, said He created us. He said, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ. He created us to worship Him. The creation half of that verse, that's universal. We all see each other, we're created. That's universal will of Allah, happened, we see it. The next part is to worship Him. Had it been universal worship, kawniyya, it would be that everyone you see on this earth is worshiping Allah. Had it been universal will, that means people bowing to statues are worshiping. Because the same way He created you, by force He created you, brought to this earth, You're worshiping also. But that's not kawniyah. Because the second part of the verse, some worship, some don't. Some have associate partners to Allah. The creation part of our خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسِ is kawniyah. The worship part, لِيَعْبُدُونَ, is shar'iyah. Meaning he ordered them to worship. He didn't create them worshiping. He ordered them to worship. That they have a choice. That's why it's shar'iyah. He likes it, he ordered it. But unlike the first one, it's not necessarily going to have to happen. Similar to this verse, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن رَسُولٍ إِلَّا لِيُطَاعَ بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. Every messenger was sent to be followed. And so people can obey him. If you say obedience in this verse is kawniyah, that means everyone on the face of this earth is obedient to Allah. And of course obedient to the messenger, which is obedience to Allah. The reality is some obey, some disobey. That's why it's called shar'iyah. It's not kawniyah, it's shar'iyah. He sent the messengers so people can obey him. He likes it. He ordered it. But it doesn't necessarily have to happen. In our verse, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. He created human and jinn to worship him. Some worship, some don't. Now you know the difference between worship and ibadah. The shar'iyah and the kawniyah. The will shar'iyah and kawniyah, and mashi'a shar'iyah and kawniyah, and the ibadah shar'iyah and kawniyah. Moving on with the verse. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. Lam. The first letter comes, the lam in the first letter, li ya'budun, comes for two things, either shar'iyya or kawniyya. Lam al-ta'lil, the lam for reason, meaning the reason for their creation is that I created human and jinn for the reason of. That's shar'iyya. That's the lam we want. Lam of reason, lam al-ta'lil. I created them for that, for worship. But in Arabic, that lam also comes as lam al-sayrura wal-aqiba. Al-sayrura wal-aqiba. The lam of a result. And in this verse, it's not the lam of a result. Because if it was the lam of result, it would mean kawniyya. And it's not kawniyya. If it was this lam, it would mean, here's what the verse would mean. I have created every human and jinn to worship me. And every individual worships me. That's how it would have been. Lam here is lam al-ta'lil of reason. The reason is, which means it's shar'iyya. It's ibadah shar'iyya. Not lam al-sayrura wal-aqiba, which means kawniyya, which means the result is that they all worship me. This is ibadah shar'iyya, not kawniyya in this verse. He did the first, which is, he mentioned the first, which is the creation. That's universal. So we can do the second, which is shar'iyya, is worship him. The creation of Allah aspect is kawniyya, universal. Everyone was created by Allah. The worship part of it, the worship part is shar'iyya, meaning he wants us all to do something, which is to worship him. We already mentioned before how traditional acts can be turned into worship by simply changing your niyyah. We mentioned, you remember, if you go to sleep in the daytime, in your purpose of sleep, you just put in your intention that you wanna sleep, so at nighttime you can wake up for qiyam al-layl. That in itself will change that sleep, the time you're sleeping, into ibadah. And you remember we talked about workout. Someone goes and works out, one goes for one reason, both are working out. One goes for one reason, one goes for another reason. One gets reward, one may get sins, and one just doesn't get nothing. So I guess the time is over. We'll continue from here inshallah next week. Jazakumullah khair. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.